So how many of you have, are kind of constantly bombarded daily with things like, how to be more happy? And, the latest I remember hearing was something like, oh, well, outsourcing makes us happy. So if we can get someone to do our laundry and do our dishes, like that makes us happy, right? Great. That's sort of the shallow science that many of us can be engaged in, or at least that the press picks up on, right? So it's this constant dance and, this like running on what we call the hedonic treadmill, right? To just continuously be seeking our happiness. If you could advance to the next slide, that'd be great. So how many of you are familiar with these terms, hedonic well-being and eudaimonic well-being? Okay, I see a couple of hands here. I'd like to just help unpack that a little bit. So one of the ways that scientists have really explored well-being, go ahead and advance again. Sorry, I'm gonna have to tell you this a couple of times so hedonic well-being is really about the power of emotions, and it's a lot of what we've studied in psychoneuroimmunology and in health science. So this is where we're exploring things like pleasure, happiness, contentment, joy. What are the things that bring us those things? And what about the opposite of that? Go ahead and advance one more time, please. These are some of the health effects that we see with hedonic well-being, just a few. So this is some of the studies that we've done. But if you think about this, a little bit in the way that we've been sort of driving our science here, it's all about trying to get somewhere. Advance one more time, please. We're constantly trying to seek our well-being from the outside and bring it back into us, whether it's to foster our own health, foster our own well-being, be a better performer, have better performance, better productivity, and kind of avoid all of that yucky stuff that, isn't our well-being, like avoid unhappiness and avoid all of these issues. So obviously, that's problematic from a perspective of if we're constantly, grasping for things and shunning other things, it doesn't really lead to a deeper sense of well-being. And yet, a lot of our science can be driven in this way, and a lot of the media kind of makes us feel like we have to constantly run on this hamster wheel. So then the question is, like, how else do we study well-being scientifically? What other aspects of well-being are there behind just simply, trying to chase emotions that we want and shove away emotions that we don't want? And there is, of course, a concept in the academic field that has been described as eudaimonic well-being. Now, how many of you have heard of this term, eudaimonia? Okay, very few. So the actual translation of eudaimonia, which comes from Greek roots, is having a good spirit. And if you dive deeply into what having a good spirit is, the literal translation of this word really has to do with being accompanied by positive guardian spirits. Now, when you talk about this in academia, you won't hear this. People will talk about eudaimonic well-being in terms of human flourishing or, inner wellness, but they'll never talk about having a good spirit or, God forbid, being accompanied by benevolent spirits. But that's actually the meaning of the word. So let's unpack that a little bit. What is that about? Aristotle was one of the ones who made the term eudaimonia very popular by describing it as something that happens when we are living according to our soul's purpose. It is when the soul is living in accordance to its virtue that we experience what is called eudaimonic well-being. And of course, this is very similar to the Eastern philosophical ideas of what is called self-actualization. So, quite simply, eudaimonic well-being is living according to soul purpose. Now, from a scientific point of view, we've done a lot of research into eudaimonic well-being as defined by Carol Riff. She's really been the pioneer in this field of eudaimonic well-being. And we've seen a number of health effects that are independent of emotional well-being, that is, independent of hedonic factors like positive affect, and all the way to reduced mortality and fewer chronic medical conditions, greater productivity. These are very, very large studies that were done with major sample sizes. When we look to the facets of what eudaimonic well-being is, it's these factors that you see up here: life purpose, self-acceptance, feeling a mastery over one's environment, and having positive relationships. It's not so much about the quantity of your relationships as it is about the quality of your relationships, and how much you feel like you have autonomy over your own life, and how much you feel like you're living in accordance to an ever-evolving pathway of personal growth. So if we take that perspective, then what I believe eudaimonic well-being is teaching us is that well-being is, of course, well beyond emotional satisfaction and egoic needs. We're really coming to understand that this process of well-being has much more to do than just chasing and avoiding emotions. It's much beyond that. And if we look at these factors of eudaimonic well-being that have been researched, what they're telling us is that it's really an interdependent process. It's, related to our relationships. It's related to our sense of the world and our place in the world. And this is what fosters well-being. Now, from a scientific framework, we might ask ourselves, well, how does this work? And this could be the source of 3 days of lecture. But really, there is a scientific framework for us to understand how it is that our soul's journey and our soul's purpose actually links with the well-being of the world. And one of the ways that we've been studying this in the frontier sciences with many partners, including the Institute of Noetic Sciences, is by exploring what we call the biofield, which is the field of energy and information that guides our health and guides communication. And so we've been studying this in the healing context, and these two pictures are here just to show that these are based in ancient practices. So these ancient practices understood that the biofield is really the interface between our soul and the physical reality that we find ourselves in now. And this is absolutely studyable scientifically. We just haven't really been placing our attention on these more non-materialist ways of looking at well-being. What the biofield hypothesis and the biofield data is teaching us is that, of course, we all vibrate. All living beings vibrate. And so not only do we vibrate, our cells vibrate, the earth vibrates. And we begin to understand how it is that the quality of our emotions, the quality of how we show up, the quality of how we're aligned with our soul's actions actually begin to affect others around us. Again, it's a growing and I would say quite nascent science. So for those of you who are interested in studying and understanding more about the biofield, you can feel free to visit our website, which is www.chi.is, where we've explored the role of the biofield in healing in great detail. And these papers are available to you at no cost. And again, this is a collaboration with many institutions, including the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Now, one of the things we wanted to do with our panel today is each of us was going to share a little bit, but we also wanted to share some of our practice. And I'd also like to make an assertion that I think I've heard several people in the room make today, which is that our personal well-being does foster evolutionary coherence. So how does this work? Well, first, we know that we're beyond our ego conditioning. That's clear. And so if we approach the practice of our own well-being from that place, we recognize that well-being is much more than just chasing our desires or avoiding ones that we don't want. We understand that our consciousness is interconnected. By understanding, of course, that you and I are not separate, I naturally don't want to harm you because you are me. So understanding well-being from this point of view and teaching well-being from this point of view to our children, to others, naturally helps us to become more nonviolent in nature and foster greater tolerance and respect for other cultures. In the same way, we recognize as we dive into the depths of our consciousness that each of us is unique. We have our own unique co-creative potential. And as we share our gifts, we can behold the gifts of others. And there's no threat, right? Because my gift and the way that I show up is my blessing that I share with you. And the way that you share your blessings, I can take in with my heart and feel no threat around it because we're all essentially manifestations of the same truth in different flavors. So this is what diving into our deep well-being teaches us. It also teaches us that we have help. Healers know this, and if you look at this beautiful graphic, which I believe comes from Alex Gray, you'll see the faces of many different leaders. It is the understanding that as we travail our life's purpose and we foster what it is that we need to see in the world, we have help from each other and from benevolent spirit. And ultimately that our purpose is to love and be loved. And this is really the heart of what well-being is. As we dive deeper into the well of our being, we recognize that that's really our soul's journey. And each of us expresses it in different ways. So I have a few embodied practice suggestions before I hand it over to Cassie, who's going to take this to the next level of transformation. And we've all been sitting and listening for a while, so I'd like to invite you to kind of stand up out of your chairs for a moment. Stand up, all of you. And just take a deep breath and exhale loudly. Nice, yes, sigh. Now this time as you do it, bring the energy all the way up to your navel and then back down into the earth, bringing energy from the earth and then back down. Now this time all the way up to the heart and back out. And this time all the way up through the head, all the way up the head, back out. Just clearing ourselves for one moment. So we begin to connect with the life-giving force of prana that nourishes and sustains us all. And we follow our breath. And now placing our attention on our feet, which so gently and deeply touch the earth. With our breath, we bring the energy up from the earth, up to our navel center, letting it come all the way up to the navel center. And then saying, I release what is not mine. I release what does not serve me, and exhale it back down to the earth. I release all that I do not need. I am supported by the earth. And now taking another deep breath in, and this time bringing it up to the heart center. Feeling the expansion in our hearts. Allowing that to extend out of our hearts, out through our arms. I am supported and I am nourished by the well of my being. I support others in their journey to healing. I nurture and I am nurtured. Breathing deeply all the while, taking another breath, and this time drawing attention to the throat, all the way up to the crown of the head. Bringing the breath up to these areas, allowing for soft release. Then again, up to the throat, the head, and the crown. I surrender to divine co-creative potential. I act in accordance to divine will. Allowing yourself to breathe deeply all through the body. Feeling your feet, connecting with Mother Earth, your heart, connecting with all in this room, loved ones. Opening to divine guidance, whatever that means for you. It's just one small exercise in helping to nourish the well of your being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cassie, go for it.
You have the clicker. the clicker.
Just having them advance slides.
Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, great.
Oh, wait, here.
It does, okay. Awesome, well, welcome everybody. I want to just stay with the practice component of what we're doing because I feel like this model of us standing up here and you sitting out there is probably getting a little bit long today. So what I'd like is for several people to answer the question, how does my well-being connect with my purpose? And the only restraint is to please use one sentence. So let's everybody reflect for a moment, close your eyes. How is my well-being connected to my purpose? Okay, one sentence. I'd like 7 people, and I'm just going to repeat it instead of trying to get a microphone to people.
I can speak out.
Thank you.
As a cosmic dance that is a toroidal dynamic in the body.
As a cosmic dance that is a royal dynamic in the body? Toroidal. Okay, got it. As a cosmic dance that is a toroidal dance in the body. A cosmic. I said I could repeat them.
As a cosmic dance.
Cosmic dance.
That is a toroidal dynamic in the body.
That is a toroidal dynamic in the body. Thank you.
Energiesway.com for you.
Love it. Yes.
When I'm working on my purpose, I feel joy.
When I'm working on my purpose, I feel joy. Yes.
My well-being is a vehicle to share my purpose with others.
My well-being is a vehicle to share my purpose with others.
The more I am consciously connected to the stream of well-being, the less I am unconsciously trying to get my needs met through what I call purpose.
Did everybody hear that?
Say it again.
I don't know if I can do it word for word. The more I am consciously connected to the stream of well-being, the less I am unconsciously attempting to get my needs met through what I call purpose.
Excellent. Thank you.
Living my purpose is integral to my well-being.
Living my purpose is integral to my well-being.
When I'm in well-being, my purpose is better understood.
When I'm in well-being, my purpose is better understood. My well-being provides the clarity about my purpose. Wonderful. Okay, because you all have one, turn to your partner and just say the one sentence, no more conversation, one sentence, turn to someone next to you and share what it was. One sentence, no discussion. Great. Okay, so let's come back. So I want to just propose this concept that, and a lot of you really spoke to it just then, that well-being is in a way holographic. There's the personal, individual, physical level of our well-being, which is me and my body and my mind. There's the energetic area of well-being that reaches a little bit maybe beyond our bodies, maybe even far beyond our bodies. There's the communal or societal aspect of our well-being, and then there's the planetary or universal aspect of our well-being. So if we look at well-being as a set of concentric circles, and you imagine that so much of our health care and medical care and self-care has to do with the personal physical, and see how much of this diagram is actually taken up by the energetic, communal, planetary, and universal. This is one thing that we think, I think all of us agree here, that if we could start to focus on well-being as a system, that would really help us as we move forward. At the Institute of Noetic Sciences, I don't know how many of you have not heard of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I'll talk a little bit about it later, but we've done a series of studies over about 15 years on how people transform their consciousness to more meaningful, purpose-filled, loving, happy ways of life. And we'll share a little bit more about it later, but it really comes down to 4 elements. One is direct experiences of interconnectedness, of the mind-body connection, of love, of joy, of meaning, of mindfulness, literally personal experiences. The second is scientific evidence, having facts that support that. The third is tools and education, and the fourth is community. So another way to look at, as you pursue your purpose, are you paying equal attention to the direct experiences you need to have on a daily basis to enhance your well-being and your connection with your purpose? Are you in the zone of facts and ever increasing your education, but not focusing on that at the expense of the others? Do you have actual practices and tools to be able to apply what you've learned in your everyday life? And do you have a community of support? And to the extent that one of those areas may not be attended to as much as another, it may require a rebalancing. So in this transformation work and in this wellness work, we like to say that it's an ecosystem of change or an ecosystem of wellness. There's multiple determinants of our wellness, and they go far beyond our own physical, personal, even mental and emotional health, but into the energetic realm, into the community and societal realm, and into the planetary realm. So a lot of you kind of pointed this out, that it's a two-way street. My well-being allows me to live with my purpose and help the community and the universal and the planetary, but the universal and planetary and my community and my energetic realm also help my well-being. So this is kind of a dialectic. As we did this research, we also looked at we basically asked people, hey, you've transformed your life to a way that was more constricted, more fear-filled, more difficult, to a way that feels a lot better to you. What did it look like when you got through it? And as Shamini was getting at with the eudaimonic versus hedonic well-being, one thing I can tell you is nobody said, well, I no longer have any symptoms or any struggles or any challenges. It's just smooth sailing. That's not where they landed. Where they landed was a place where they had challenges, they had all these kinds of things happen in their lives, but their relationship to those things were different. So well-being moves from this idea that we should all be comfortable to we might have vibrancy, that we want to feel good more often, to a broader and deeper range and depth of feeling. From certainty, or I will find the answer, to openness and spontaneity and flexibility and comfort with uncertainty. From accrual of items or accolades or achievements in our lives to gratitude, humility, and forgiveness. And it just kind of keeps going, moving from the pursuit of pleasure to the pursuit or the enjoyment or the noticing of what already exists in our world with awe, wonder, joy, contentment, meaning, love, purpose. So this is kind of a different way of looking at the world, and what people said was, one of the ways we asked people, like, what are the elements of well-being, is how do you recognize somebody who seems to be integrating this into their lives? And they didn't say things like, they're happy all the time or they have no trouble. They said they have a sparkle in their eyes. They have a lightness in their being. When I'm in their presence, I feel love, not just from them, but I feel love for others when I'm in their presence. And so those kinds of qualities our current psychological science have barely even begun to delve into, and I'm really excited about doing that. So those are just some thoughts to toss around as I pass it on to Yeshua. I know who you are, I just didn't know which one of you.
And this slide comes from Claudia Wells. We took out, obviously, her slides when we knew she wasn't coming, but I just love this one, and I thought you guys would appreciate it.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to share some of my personal story with you related to my well-being and how that's affected the world and how the world around me has affected me. So, as Shamini has shared, I was in the military. I'm a combat veteran dealt with PTSD for many years. We've all had our trauma in different forms. And that's what brought me to wellness. I was suicidal, I hated life, and I was yearning for my purpose. And it drove me to almost insanity for a long time. And even to the extent when I had a partner that shared with me that my wife told me she had terminal cancer, I didn't feel a thing. I was so disconnected from myself and from my world that my partner was telling me, someone you would think you loved the most, I couldn't feel a thing, and I was conscious of it. And that's what awoken me to, okay, there's something really wrong right here, wake up. What are you gonna do? And part of the active search was with her, being pulled out of myself to help her in her terminal illness through her own well-being. By helping her in her well-being, about a decade ago, I was on a journey to find my own well-being. And so that's the first principle I'd like to share today, is to consider is when we can pull ourselves out of our muck, out of ourself, see something larger than self, and sometimes that's seemingly coincidental, sometimes we're gifted with it, it's coming to us. But if there's a challenge of something in our life, yes, be real, how do we work with it? And then, how do we work with what's around us? And together, the next concentric circle that's been shared here already, we have the personal well-being, our personal self. Next is the interactive with our community. Many of you here are my community. I feel so grateful to have you here. And I do feel that you are an extension of this body. I do, very much so. And recognizing that my purpose is not actualized and activated unless together that community continues to become more tightly woven, connected, how we can build our compassion and love, and actively do things in the world. So the third line of work, think of the outer circle that's also Cassie has shared, is society. And an example is I was able to go into my well-being with my partner, what's interactive, and those around me, that eventually led me more towards what is my work in the world, and that greater informed more of self. So there's these multiple different spheres, and I'd like to talk a little bit about them. Oftentimes I find, related to purpose, we find these limitations. There's almost like a fence. I was at a talk last weekend, and I don't know who was there then, but I used the metaphor of the fence, of like an eco-village. Many of the people that were there are sustainability advocates and creating a lot of initiatives in the world, and we all have our own sphere, like a biosphere. How do we recognize what that biosphere limitations are? Because all of us have those limitations, all of us. And part of our work is to recognize what is that barrier, what is the edge. Like in Phoenix, Arizona, there's a literal biosphere. I don't know who's heard of the Biosphere Project in Tucson? Okay, so imagine like this glass, like container that's holding what's within, and there's like this completely closed loop system inside that humans are trying to optimize, creating, recycling their waste, growing their food, working in harmony with the plants to get the oxygen. But there's still the biosphere, and everything around it was not impacted. Positive. Life was not continuing to ripple out. It was contained. Consider we all have our own biosphere, and we all have those edges, and part of the purpose, I find, is us finding where that is and how we can expand that on all the spheres. And one example of that, I was at Standing Rock earlier this year. Again, who was at Standing Rock? Or who knows someone at Standing Rock that was at Standing Rock? It's probably, okay, like a 3/4 of the room. I was invited there to do a systemic analysis of all the elders and leaders that were there and to see why they weren't winning. And I found it came back to a core principle of the mindset of we were just in resistance. And maybe if we would have been in resistance, part of that work, in balance also with another form, another way of being, of actually how do we increase the well-being of this place, what's real here. And there was so much that was projected out into the world that we lost sight of what we were really doing there. Where humans were connected together, a lot of really beautiful organic things happened, but once we left, that place actually was worse than when we arrived, socially and ecologically. And so that's my encouragement for us today when we talk about well-being and what we're doing in our world is let's get real. And let's talk about what is real in your place, your life, your family, your community, there's that fence. And how do we learn to work with that? How do we learn to work with what's real? Because it's so easy for years, part of me in my own healing process was to look to like, let's create change in the world. So I'm going to be a successful social entrepreneur and touch millions of people. 1 billion lives will be my life goal, you know, and was completely losing the sight of how do I show up and just be more love? How do I be whole right now? And eventually the story with my partner that I had, she ended up leaving me because I wasn't whole. I wasn't making that the core of my life. So my life started falling apart. And that required me a few years ago. I went out into the natural world in the last 3 years. I've been connecting to, well, what is my nature? What is my wholeness? And how am I connected to the larger wholeness of the system around me? How do I learn from the natural world? And so I brought a couple of leaves here just as an example. There's many different ways that life, there's 3 different forms. Just outside here, when you go outside, look at the natural world. You got here, there's one plant. It's capturing, it's absorbing carbon dioxide. It's cleaning up our carbon dioxide. And it's turning it into life for us. And there's many different ways that's done. And that may even change. But there's something in the DNA that's in each of those that's distinctive and unique, and I believe that each of us has that. And I believe also in our lifetime that we can discover that. When we ask, what is nature? What is nature's purpose? Let's just contemplate that for a second. What is the purpose of nature? It's a good question. Nature works really well. I'm not going to give you an answer because I don't know. I'm discovering it. But one thing I find that there's basic principles in nature that we can learn to live by. And one of them is just simply moving from adopting strategies or ways that we've learned from others and coming back to our core. It's like, what is it that, how can I adapt to my environment of what's real here right now? And as we can adapt to our environment, adjust like this leaf, adjust and shift and change, be flexible with what's real, what's here, and then grow and expand into that while cleaning up our environment and giving back life. I think it's a very simple, beautiful metaphor of simply how we can live. Like right now, all of us could leave here today and we all could be healthy, whole humans, as you are. Or we can choose to walk out and not be so. And that's a realization I've had on this path a few years. I lived in nature for about 6 months, walked the PCT through California, and I had this profound experience. And it was like, I woke up and said, oh my God, like, I'm whole. There's nothing wrong. Like, actually, my purpose in life is just to be whole and be love. And everything else works. And things change over time. But when I have other thoughts come in that tell me otherwise, I've surrounded myself in an environment. I'm just about done, 30 seconds. I think I've hit my time. Is that how do we just choose right now, find our barrier where we think we're not healthy, human, or whole, to come back to that and surround an environment, seeing that in others, in all the different spheres around us. So thank you.
Yeshua, thank you. That was beautiful. So Rave is going to share some thoughts, I think, from a personal point of view as well.
Sure. Yeah. Those are great words, Yeshua. Great thoughts from you, Cassie. What I keep coming back to as I was listening to everybody talk on this specific topic was, what's the number one thing that prevents us from our well-being, from accessing our well-being, or hurting our well-being that enables us or doesn't enable us to activate our purpose? And the thought that came to me was fear. And I spent 15 years researching fear, starting when I was in my early 20s. We started on an engineering project that I was on, which was inspecting the structural integrity of a high-rise. And as a structural engineer, I'd have to go up to 30 floors where it's just slabs and columns. And my job specifically was to go to the slab, edge of the slab, lean over, count the rebar, make sure the rebar matches the plans, and then come back and report that every single day for 6 or 7 months. And I didn't realize until the first day I went up in that open shaft elevator that I had to fear heights. So I'm up there wondering why I'm up there, thinking this is probably going to be the most miserable job I've ever had. And as I look around and wait for people to kind of not pay attention and crawl on my belly about 20 feet to the edge of the slab, count it, come back, record it, over and over again, I was thinking to myself, like, how did this, I don't remember ever having a fear of heights, and how did I get it? Is it, is it a virus? Is it a bug? So it wasn't until like 3 months into this that one day the superintendent said, hey, can you check if the concrete truck showed up? And I was kind of in the middle of something, so I wasn't thinking clearly, and I said, sure. And I walked over to the edge, looked around, couldn't find the concrete truck for about a minute, and then I went back and reported it. And I thought to myself, like, wow, did I just do that? Did I just walk to the edge and actually look and didn't break out into panic attacks and heavy breathing? So I was like, hey, maybe it was a disease. Maybe it was like a virus, and I'm cured now. So I thought to walk back over, and I started looking around, and I could start to feel my heart palpitate, my hands start to sweat again, and then the breathing, accelerate, and I stepped back like, whoa, okay, that's what I'm used to. So, but what was the difference between what I did the first time and then what I just did now? I was looking for a truck, so I went back, started looking around. I said, as long as I focused on looking for this truck, I was fine. The minute I stopped, my mind would wander to the future. What if I slip? What if I lose balance? What if a gush of wind pushes me over? What if the edge of the slab breaks? What if, right? So I stepped back, and that was my first clue. I was like, wow, maybe you could beat fear. And I spent the next 15 years jumping out of planes, swimming with sharks, cliff diving, running in caves, public speaking when I wasn't prepared to, and trying to understand and observe what my thoughts were before when I was in a safe place and what it was when I was actually in a space where I was engaged in some kind of potential fear. And I came up with 3 fundamental principles of what I understood how fear works and what activates it. So I'm just going to take a minute and share some of those with you, and then we could go into the discussion. So first, fear is based on time. It's always I call these the 3 pillars of fear. Time is the first one. Fear is always based in the future, many times stimulated by the past, always experienced in the present, right? So like I explained, when you're in a state of fear, you're somewhere in the future. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if? And unless you pull yourself to the present, the cure of that is pulling yourself into the present. Now, you could do that in a number of ways. In that case, I had a task. I was looking for a truck. You could breathe. You could do a number of other exercises that can pull you present. But the practice is, if you're in the present, there's no room for fear to exist, because it only exists in space. The second thing I discovered was fear is based on attachment. Now, attachments in a lot of Eastern philosophies, well, not a lot, but some of the Eastern philosophies says attachment is bad. We want to be detached. And from my perspective, attachment's necessary. Attachment means relationships, and we need relationships to grow and push back against, right? So it's not that attachment is bad, but what could be caused a friction is the nature of the attachment. So I kind of fundamentally broke it down into 2 base types of attachments. One is there's a structural attachment, something very rigid, right? So if the object of my attachment, whether it's a person or a place or an ideal or a thing, if I'm trying to hold on to it and position it where I believe it should be relative to me, it creates a very rigid structure. And there are universal forces that push on myself and, say, this person, this relationship I might be in, for example. And it creates stress in this, say, the structural beam that's holding us together. And if there's enough forces in the opposite direction, there's enough stress, it snaps the beam and we just slingshot away from each other. And the entire experience is miserable. It's completely full of stress. The other type of attachment is when I let go. And this person, place, thing, ideal is still in my orbit, and as universal forces push us around, we just kind of orbit around each other in different positions, but we're still within whatever's relevant, the relevant space or relevant frequency. Now, what keeps us in orbit is our resonant frequencies. My frequency is matching this person, place, thing, ideal, and it stays there, and if forces push us around, we start to rotate around each other. If our frequencies change, then this object may naturally gravitate away from me or naturally gravitate closer to me. But the whole time, there's no stress in the system because I let go. The difference between the two is in the first one, when I'm holding on to this thing or person, I'm focusing all my attention on it and where I believe it should be relative to me with the limited amount of knowledge and perception I have. When I let go, I'm actually focusing on me, trying to increase my gravitational field, trying to become a better human, trying to become and grow and expand. and it's pulling the right things into my space and letting the things that no longer are relevant to me naturally go away. So that's attachment. The third is a special type of attachment. It's an attachment to a specific outcome, or what we call an expectation. Now, expectations are based on goals, and goals are important because it helps propel us forward, right? It's the thing that gives us our drive. It helps us move in a direction. Whether we know if it's the right direction or not, it keeps us moving. So goals are actually foundationally based on intentions. And a lot of times we forget what underlies the goal is the intention, and the intention we originally had before we set the goal. And as we pursue this goal, we form a rigid outcome, which we call an expectation, of kind of has specific forms. I want this to happen in this specific way, right? And if it doesn't happen, well, first of all, if it does happen, then it was expected. So there's no real joy or elation because we knew that's what we were trying to make happen. And if it doesn't happen, there's a lot of demoralization that takes place, and it blocks your flow. It pulls energy out of the system. However, if we shift our mindset and say, okay, instead of an expectation, I still want to maintain the goal because it moves me, keeps me moving forward, but instead of looking at it as an expected outcome, what if I change that to, that's my preference, a preferred outcome? And then what it does is it opens me up to all the other possibilities. I keep moving because I've got to move towards something, otherwise you just float and drift. But if I don't accomplish that goal, okay, that's fine, because there's many other options of how that goal, or maybe not that goal, but maybe that intention can still be served. And if I do, there's a great joy and elation, because, oh wow, it worked out the way I hoped it to work out, or I wanted it to work out, right? So just a subtle mind shift from expectation to preference, and also recognizing that the goal may no longer be relevant, and paying attention to that, because circumstances have changed, but the intention always is. So what I found is these three pillars, time, expectation, and attachment, all have to be active for fear to exist. If you knock down any one of those pillars, if you bring yourself present, fear is gone. If you can't do that because you say you have to plan for the future, then you shift the nature of your attachment, fear goes away. If you can't do that, then you shift your mindset from an expectation to a preference, fear goes away. So I started using this as a practice in identifying, the hardest thing to do is catch yourself when you're in a state of fear. And how I define fear is all negative emotions are rooted in fear, and the opposite of fear is trust. All positive emotions emerge through trust. So if you feel any kind of stress, anger, frustration, insecurity, jealousy, envy, or any other negative stressful sensation, you're probably in a fear state. And when you catch yourself, you could, what I did is I would analyze those three pillars to see which one I could knock down the fastest. And through that process, I've shed myself of many, many fears. And here I am today speaking to you, not having any idea what I was going to talk about until this moment. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. So we wanted to leave at least 10 minutes for some discussion with you guys, because I do feel like we've been we've been doing a lot of talking, and there's been a lot of this going on. I'd love to see more of this. I can exercise my privilege as a moderator to start the flow of discussion, but I'd also like to open it up to all of you to see if you have any burning questions or considerations for our panel. And then I'll ask our panelists, in the interest of time, that, to just respond if you feel like you really feel like you have something that you must, share, and then be mindful of the other panelists to give their time as well. Do we have anyone to pass around the mic, or should I do that? I can do it.
What if someone wants to ask you a question? Want me to take this one or a different one?
That one's great, yeah. And if you could raise your hand if you have a question. Yeah? Great, thank you.
Hello, everyone. This question is related to healing and resentment. So how do you heal and get through a resentment while not keeping those relationships that cause that resentment out of your life? Because I feel like once you forgive, then you may be open to letting that relationship back into your life. But what if you just fundamentally know that you don't want that relationship in your life? So do you keep that hatred to keep them at bay, or how do you mitigate that? So that's a tough one. So anyone that finds themselves a subject matter expert on this, feel free to answer.
I could. Yeah, I'm an expert on all things fear. No, I mean, what you're referring to is kind of a self-protection mechanism. You're afraid that forgiving is an opening up and healing, process. So you're moving into a state of trust when you forgive. But you still have this sense of fear, like, oh, what if I let this person back in when I already know it's not a healthy thing for me? So I think that's just pure awareness. So you can forgive with awareness. And if you come from that point of view, then it's okay that this person did these things or these things happen in your relationship, but it doesn't make it any more relevant to you now than it was back then. It served its purpose. So just acknowledging that, okay, it served its purpose, I'm forgiving it, but I'm moving on. It's probably a more healthier lens than holding on to hatred, just to be as a protection mechanism.
I'd like to address this as well. So from an Eastern philosophical point of view, or I will just say, from a Jan point of view and other point of views, we can look at the process of resentment as still a process of attachment. So if you think about it from kind of an energy point of view, you still have a cord with that person, right? You're still exchanging energy, whether that's positive energy or not positive energy. And it sounds like what you're seeking is a way to sort of mitigate that connection, at least for now, while you do your own healing, right? So a lot of, energy healers will talk about cutting cords. That's one way. There's a visualization where you say, I have no enmity for you. I release you. You can visualize this in terms of a cord that comes from a certain place in your body. If you feel there's a certain place in your body where you hold the resentment, really tune into that place and just allow it to release. And the key here, I think, is to really be neutral. So there's no ill will, there's no positivity, there's no negativities. There's just a releasing of what that is, which is really an attachment that no longer serves. And I found that process to be really helpful.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm interested in some of the practices or applications you all can imagine, based on the ideas that you talked about, with groups of folks, organizations, for whom what you're talking about might seem really foreign or weird. So maybe what are some of the back doors into opening people up? And specifically practices with groups.
Yeah, what's your name? Allison, thank you. I'll try to keep this under a minute so we can have some more questions, and Allison would be happy to talk more. So there's many fields that are working with organizations, and the field of OD, organizational development, right, is kind of bringing in these concepts in a more tangible way. Some of the projects I'm working on in OD are helping that. Right now, working on with a team to establish mindfulness at Facebook. So that's like an in route. So we're using mindfulness, wellness, well-being as an opening around purpose and all sorts of other human development work. And another practical project. So that's one technique or one tool, is like using the field of mindfulness. Another, I have a building project with a new building site in Mountain View for a Google complex. And we're using sustainability as a medium to do the human development work. So we're gathering people together, we're helping to harmonize complexity, and then we're helping to do these other lines of work that we're talking about, to bring healing to the community, to help individuals also to self-reflect, see where their own inhibitions are, and the challenges they have in communicating and collaborating. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I have one other thing to add to that. You're talking about opening people up within a group like this, for example, or you mean a community?
In the existing organization.
Existing organization, okay.
They have a culture that's not necessarily open to what you expect.
Understand.
Another good entree is usually health, right? So if you frame it within wellness, if you're in an organization and, say you're wanting to talk to the leadership, the CEOs or whatever, and say, if we can foster greater well-being and happiness is the buzz term, right? You can actually point to data that links well-being to increased health and productivity, so that's a good entree.
Sounds helps.
Shamini, we have a question back here.
Oh, there you are, Laura. Great.
Hi, just quickly, if I could get all of you to respond to how this relates to the field of positive psychology. So, how do you feel about it?
I'll be very brief. Obviously, these terms of well-being, subjective well-being, eudaimonic well-being, hedonic well-being, have come out of the psychology, academic field, and positive psychology is part of that. I personally, over the several decades now that I've been, engaged in active research, have an appreciation for the rise of positive psychology, because it was, first of all, it wasn't the, I won't, go off on this, but it wasn't that long ago that, psychoneuroimmunology didn't even exist, right? The idea that our emotions affected our bodies was like heresy 50 years ago. And when people started doing the work, it was all about negative emotions, stress, and disease model, disease pathogenesis, and we're still kind of, that's where we are. But the attention and the focus that the positive psychology movement and very deep researchers in the positive psychology movement have done are helping us to reframe the way that we view health and healing. And so I see them as allies in this work, absolutely.
Yeah, my quick answer would be that positive psychology is awesome, and it should keep going. And what usually happens with concepts like this is that when they move into the mainstream academic community, they get sort of sucked dry of anything that relates to energy or spirit, or because of this sort of ongoing dedication to a very understandable concept of separation of church and state and keeping religion out of things. But unfortunately, even something like chiropractic, for example, becomes a manipulation of bone and muscle instead of what it really was, which was a form of vitalism to open energy channels. Or acupuncture becomes an endorphin release mechanism rather than what it originally was. So it doesn't mean that everything original was right, because a lot of what was original was totally wrong. But the sapping out of the energy components of these things, I think, reduced their potency.
Well said, thank you. All right, maybe
Remind me your name again? Deborah? Deborah, thank you. I'll go back to my statement that I had for all of us to leave here with positive psychology, that we're all whole, healthy human beings. I truly believe that. And I believe we can choose to step into that, and that has radically changed my life and those that I've seen and worked with. It's also radically changed their life, but how is it authentic? And so I think there's, to answer that question, how are we based in what's real in our world? Then also maybe consider that what's real is we're adapting and it's okay. And in that, I'm actually okay. If that answers your question. Thank you.
I feel good.
All right, well, our time has ended. Thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you.